Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, we're diving into a case that's as heartbreaking as it is shocking. This is the story of Summer Inman, a woman who found herself trapped in a life she never wanted, and the tragic events that unfolded. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're into true crime stories. Let's get started. Summer Inman was more than just a name in a headline. She was a vibrant young woman full of life and love. On the surface, she appeared to have the quintessential American life, a loving husband, adorable children, and a cozy home in Logan, Ohio. But the facade was just that, a facade. Summer met Inman at the Tabernacle of Faith Church, a place that should have been a sanctuary, a place of peace and spiritual growth. For many, the church was the heart of the community, but for Summer, it became the backdrop for a life that was slowly unraveling. The couple's relationship seemed idyllic at first, especially within the close-knit community of their church. They were the young couple that older congregants pointed to as a shining example of what a Christian marriage should be. But what those outside didn't see were the subtle signs of control and manipulation that will begin to exert over Summer. The church, which should have been a place of refuge for Summer, instead became a stage where Will's darker tendencies began to manifest. Whether it was the way he insisted on choosing her outfits for Sunday service, or how he isolated her from friends and family, claiming that a wife's place is by her husband's side, the warning signs were there. Summer's smile, once genuine and spontaneous, became increasingly forced as she navigated a life that was becoming a living nightmare. Her eyes, which used to light up at the sight of her children playing, now seemed to be constantly searching for an escape route that she couldn't find. So, who was Summer Inman? She was a woman caught in a web of emotional and psychological abuse, a woman who, despite the walls closing in around her, still had the courage to dream of a better life for herself and her children. And it's that courage that makes her story so heartbreaking, yet so incredibly important to tell. The Tabernacle of Faith was no ordinary church, founded by David Oyedepo, a man who claimed to have had an 18-hour divine meeting with God himself. The church had a magnetic pull that drew people in from all walks of life. It wasn't just a place to worship, it was a community, a lifestyle, and for some, like Will's parents, Bill and Sandra Inman, it was the epicenter of their world. Bill and Sandra were not just casual attendees. They were devout members whose lives were intricately woven into the fabric of the church. Their fervor for the teachings and doctrines of the church was not something they kept to themselves. It was a family affair, deeply influencing their son Will, and by extension, Summer. The Inmans were the kind of family that sat in the front row every Sunday, Bible in hand, hanging on to every word that came from the pulpit. They were active in church events, led Bible studies, and were considered pillars of the community. But this deep involvement had a darker side, especially when it came to their son Will's relationship with Summer. The church's teachings on marital roles and family dynamics became a tool in Will's hands, a way to exert control over Summer. Phrases like "wives, submit to your husbands" were not just theological concepts but were taken as literal directives. Will, backed by the unyielding support of his parents, used these teachings to justify his increasingly controlling behavior towards Summer. For Summer, the church became a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was a community where she found friendship and support, but on the other, it was the very place that fortified her husband's abusive tendencies. The same sanctuary that offered hymns and sermons of love and compassion also became the stage for her subjugation. And so, the Tabernacle of Faith, a place that should have been a refuge, became a prison of sorts for Summer. It was a place where the walls were adorned with verses of love and freedom, but for her, those walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating her slowly under the guise of piety and devotion. The church's influence was not just spiritual, it was pervasive, affecting every aspect of Summer's life and becoming a silent accomplice in the tragedy that unfolded. It's a chilling reminder of how institutions that should offer solace can sometimes become instruments of suffering. As the days turned into months and months into years, the marriage between Summer and Will began to fray at the edges, like a piece of cloth worn thin by constant use. The love that had once seemed so promising was now a distant memory, replaced by a palpable tension that you could almost touch. Summer felt like a bird in a gilded cage, beautiful yet confined, her wings clipped not just by her husband, but also by the overbearing presence of his parents, Bill and Sandra. Summer's life became a series of calculated moves, each step taken with the caution of someone walking on a tightrope. Her home, which should have been her sanctuary, felt more like a surveillance state. Will's controlling behavior escalated, and his parents, rather than being a moderating influence, seemed to fuel the fire. Their home was filled with the constant hum of tension, like a guitar string stretched too tight, ready to snap at any moment. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, Summer found a small but significant outlet, a personal diary. Hidden away in the back of a drawer, underneath a pile of old clothes, lay a simple notebook. Its pages were filled with Summer's elegant handwriting, a stark contrast to the chaos that surrounded her. This diary became her confidant, the silent witness to her inner world. In the pages of this diary, Summer poured out her soul. She wrote about her fears, her frustrations, and her desperate yearning for freedom. She detailed incidents of emotional and psychological abuse, moments where she felt her spirit breaking but had nowhere to turn. She wrote about feeling isolated, not just physically but emotionally, as if she were an island in the middle of a vast, uncaring ocean. The diary entries were a mix of sorrow and hope, each word a testament to her resilience. She wrote about her children, the tiny rays of sunshine in her otherwise cloudy world, and how she dreamed of giving them a better life. She also wrote about her plans, however tentative, to escape this life and find her own path. But the diary was more than just a collection of thoughts. It was a lifeline, a tangible proof that she existed, that she mattered, even if it was only to herself. It was a small act of rebellion, a quiet assertion of her own identity in a world that seemed hell-bent on erasing it. As Summer filled the pages with her words, she was unknowingly documenting a life that was spiraling out of control, leaving behind a paper trail of a marriage that was anything but a partnership. It was a cry for help that no one could hear, a silent scream in the dark. And as each day passed, that scream grew louder, echoing in the empty corridors of her life, waiting for someone, anyone, to hear it. The diary was Summer's sanctuary, a sacred space where she could be her true self, unfiltered and unjudged. It was a small notebook, nondescript and easily overlooked, but to Summer it was priceless. Each page was a canvas where she painted her emotions in words, each entry a snapshot of her soul at that moment in time. Summer wrote about feeling like a prisoner, confined not by bars or walls but by the invisible chains of emotional abuse and manipulation. Her home, which should have been a haven, felt more like a cell. She described the suffocating atmosphere, how the walls seemed to close in on her, making it hard to breathe. She wrote about the constant scrutiny, the feeling of being watched every moment of every day, as if she were a specimen under a microscope. But what was even more heartbreaking was her crisis of faith. Summer had grown up in a religious environment, and her faith had always been a source of comfort and strength. But now she felt abandoned, even by God. She wrote about praying for a sign, for some divine intervention that would set her free, but all she heard was silence. It was as if the heavens had closed their doors on her, leaving her to fend for herself in this earthly hell. This diary, filled with her raw and unfiltered thoughts, would later become a pivotal piece of evidence in understanding the emotional landscape Summer was navigating. It was a window into her soul, a roadmap of her emotional journey, marked with signposts of despair and glimmers of hope. The diary was not just a collection of words, it was a testament to her struggle. It was proof that she had not given in, that she had not allowed her spirit to be crushed completely. It was a record of her resilience, her silent fight against the odds. And most importantly, it was a voice, her voice, rising from the pages like a phoenix from the ashes, refusing to be silenced, refusing to be forgotten. When this diary was later discovered, it sent shockwaves through everyone who read it. It was a mirror held up to the face of a society that often turns a blind eye to the emotional and psychological abuse that happens behind closed doors. It was a wake-up call, a siren in the night, urging us to pay attention, to listen, and to act. So, as we delve deeper into this story, let's not forget the diary, for it is not just a book, it is a life that was lived in the shadows but refuses to die in the dark. The day Summer Inman vanished was like any other, at least on the surface. The sun rose, people went about their daily routines, and life seemed to move in its usual, predictable patterns. But for Summer's family and close friends, the world had suddenly tilted off its axis. The air grew thick with tension, each passing hour a heavy weight that sank hearts and fueled fears. Summer was not the type to just go missing. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend. She had responsibilities, people who depended on her, and a life that, despite its challenges, she was trying to navigate. So when she didn't show up for a planned meeting and her phone went straight to voicemail, alarm bells started ringing. The community rallied like never before. Search parties were organized, flyers were distributed, and social media campaigns were launched. Everyone from local businesses to complete strangers came together in a collective effort to find Summer. It was as if the entire town had put its life on hold, united by a single, urgent mission to bring Summer home. But as the days turned into weeks, hope began to wane. The initial surge of adrenaline was replaced by a gnawing anxiety, a dread that settled in the pit of everyone's stomach. The search took on a more desperate tone, as if people were not just looking for Summer, but also for the last shreds of hope that were slipping through their fingers. And then, the unimaginable happened. What was discovered sent shockwaves through the community, reverberating in the hearts and minds of everyone who had held out hope for a different outcome. It was a discovery so horrifying, so utterly soul-crushing, that it left people speechless, struggling to make sense of the senseless. Summer was found, but not in the way anyone had hoped or prayed for. The details were gruesome, the reality a living nightmare. It was a discovery that shattered illusions, broke hearts, and left a permanent scar on the soul of the community. As people grappled with the news, a heavy silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the sounds of muffled sobs and whispered prayers. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silence that screamed in its deafening quietude. It was the silence of dreams shattered, of innocence lost, and of a life that had been cruelly and senselessly snuffed out. In that moment, everyone knew that life would never be the same again. The world had shifted, and in its wake, left a gaping hole, a void filled with unanswered questions and unspoken regrets. And as people stood there, staring into the abyss, one thing became painfully clear. This was not just a tragedy, it was an atrocity, one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The investigation into Summer Inman's disappearance and subsequent tragic discovery was like peeling back the layers of an onion, each layer revealing more complexity and darkness than the last. The local police, joined by state investigators and even federal agents, found themselves navigating a labyrinth of conflicting emotions, religious beliefs, and deeply rooted family dynamics. The diary, a small, nondescript notebook hidden away in a drawer, became the Rosetta Stone of the investigation. As detectives pored over its pages, they were given a haunting glimpse into Summer's inner world. Her words were raw, filled with a despair so palpable it was as if her soul had bled onto the paper. She wrote about feeling trapped, about the walls closing in on her, and about a God who seemed distant and uncaring. It was a diary that spoke not just of unhappiness, but of a profound, existential dread. But the diary did more than just reveal Summer's emotional state. It also provided investigators with a roadmap to understanding the complex relationships that had ensnared her. It became clear that the church, the Tabernacle of Faith, was more than just a place of worship. It was a vortex that had pulled Summer and her family into its orbit, exerting a level of control and influence that was both pervasive and insidious. As investigators dug deeper, they began to unravel the tightly wound threads of the Inman family. Interviews with friends, family, and church members painted a picture of a family that was deeply enmeshed in their religious community, but also deeply dysfunctional. Will's parents, Bill and Sandra, emerged as figures of particular interest. Their devoutness was extreme, bordering on fanaticism, and their influence over their son Will was significant. The more the investigators learned, the more they realized that this was not a simple case of a marriage gone sour. It was a toxic brew of religious extremism, emotional manipulation, and a patriarchal family structure that had created a pressure cooker of dysfunction. And at the center of it all was Summer, a woman who had been caught in a web so intricate and so suffocating that it had ultimately consumed her. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the investigators found themselves wrestling with their own emotions. Each revelation was a gut punch, each interview a window into a world that defied comprehension. It was an investigation that took a toll, not just professionally but also personally, as they grappled with the darkness they had uncovered. And as they prepared to make their case, to bring justice for Summer and closure for her family, they knew that they were not just prosecuting a crime. They were shining a light on a twisted ideology, a distorted belief system that had enabled, and even facilitated, an unspeakable tragedy. It was a case that would leave no one untouched, a case that would forever change the way people looked at faith, family, and the terrifying depths to which human beings can sink. The day the arrests were made was one that sent shockwaves through the community and the nation at large. Will Inman, the man who had vowed to love and cherish Summer, was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and defiance. But he wasn't alone. His parents, Bill and Sandra, were arrested alongside him, their faces equally unreadable but tinged with a sense of grim inevitability. The news spread like wildfire, leaving people stunned and horrified. How could a family, bound by blood and faith, be implicated in such a heinous act? The arrest wasn't just an indictment of Will. It was an indictment of an entire belief system, a way of life that had been twisted into something dark and malevolent. The trial that followed was nothing short of a media circus. Reporters from all over the country descended on the small town, their cameras and microphones capturing every moment, every emotion, for a public that was both fascinated and repulsed by the unfolding drama. The courtroom was packed to the brim, the tension palpable as the prosecution laid out its case. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, DNA samples, and, most damning of all, the haunting words from Summer's diary. But what truly shocked the courtroom was the defense's strategy. Will and his legal team didn't just plead innocence. They attempted to paint Summer as the unstable one, using out-of-context excerpts from her diary and even questioning the legitimacy of her faith. It was a move that reeked of desperation and only served to further vilify Will and his family in the eyes of the public and the jury. As for Bill and Sandra, their role in this twisted tale was laid bare for all to see. Phone records, financial transactions, and even their own contradictory statements all pointed to a level of involvement that was deeply unsettling. It was as if they had been complicit in their son's actions, their own twisted beliefs blurring the lines between right and wrong. The trial wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a reckoning. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about faith, family, and the human capacity for evil. It was a trial that asked difficult questions, questions that didn't have easy answers. And as the jury filed out to deliberate, the weight of those questions hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the complexity and the tragedy of the case. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom was silent but for the gasps of disbelief and the muffled sobs of Summer's family. Guilty on all counts, Will was led away, his face now a mask of defeat and resignation. His parents, too, were found guilty, their faces etched with the realization that they had not only lost their freedom but also their place in a community that had once embraced them. It was a trial that would be etched in the annals of legal history, a case study in the corrosive power of twisted faith and unchecked familial loyalty. And as the gavel came down, sealing the fates of Will, Bill, and Sandra, one couldn't help but wonder how many more Summers are out there, caught in webs we cannot even begin to see. As we come to the end of this heart-wrenching story, we're left grappling with questions that haunt us, questions that may never have satisfying answers. How did Summer, a woman who had so much to live for, find herself ensnared in such a tragic and horrifying situation? Was it love gone wrong? Or was it something darker, something deeply ingrained in the very fabric of her life? And then there's the Tabernacle of Faith. This wasn't just a church, it was a community, a way of life, and for Summer and the Inmans, it was a cornerstone. But did it also serve as a breeding ground for the twisted beliefs that led to this tragedy? Did the church's teachings play a role in shaping the mindset of Will and his parents, giving them the moral justification for their actions? These are questions that force us to examine the role of faith and community in our lives, to question how something meant to provide comfort and guidance can be twisted into a tool for control and harm. But perhaps the most pressing question of all is, how do we prevent such tragedies from happening again? How do we protect the Summers of the world, those who find themselves trapped in situations that spiral out of control, that defy understanding? It's a question that challenges us as a society, that forces us to confront the inadequacies in our systems and our beliefs. It's a question that we must strive to answer, not just for Summer, but for all those who suffer in silence. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing, emotional journey through a story that has left us all shaken. If this narrative has moved you, if it has made you think, then I urge you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. Because the more we talk about these stories, the more we bring them into the light, the closer we come to preventing them from happening again. Let's all strive to make the world a better place, to be the change we want to see, to stand up against injustice in all its forms. Because it's only when we come together, when we share these stories and confront these issues, that we can hope to create a safer, more compassionate world. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop seeking the truth.